Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. So first off, I just want to say thank you for joining us on this quick session about the Mediterranean diet. And we're going to start off by learning a little bit of the history behind it first, and then we'll move on to what it actually is. And when we think of diet, there's so many times many of us think about changing our diets, but we struggle. We feel stuck and find it difficult to make healthy choices. So let's take a second to think, what are some of the challenges that you feel are for you, or some obstacles that you face? Is it that it's too hard, it's too confusing, it's too time consuming? Healthy foods don't taste as great, it's too expensive. I know when I think about that, the number one reason for myself is it is just too time consuming. I'm the worst at spending enough time and doing meal prepping like I should. And so sometimes that for me is the biggest challenge. But if we stop to think, if we knew that 2/3 of chronic disease could be prevented by our lifestyle changes, specifically by diet and exercise, does that change our minds, and does that change our willpower? So with the Mediterranean diet, it makes making a change easier because not only is it healthy, but it is also delicious and satisfying. The Mediterranean diet blends the basics of healthy eating with the traditional flavors and cooking methods of the Mediterranean. So if we take a look at the slide, the Mediterranean diet is more than a flavor, it's a lifestyle. Foods that we once thought of as too high in fat or unhealthy, including nuts and olive oil and olives, become an everyday part of our diet. So why do we focus on the Med Way? The interest in the Mediterranean diet began in the 1960s. Researchers began to observe that coronary heart disease caused fewer deaths in the Mediterranean countries such as Greece and Italy than in the US and Northern Europe. They attributed their results to this region because of their lifestyle and the environment. So which focused on including and enjoying a wide variety of whole and nourishing foods with friends and family, and practicing an active lifestyle. So the foundation of the Mediterranean diet is actually centered mostly around plant-based foods, like vegetables, fruits, herbs, nuts, beans, and whole grains. Dishes are created with lots of herbs and spices to add flavor to your plate. The Med diet also does include a moderate amount of dairy and poultry and eggs, and seafood is central to the Mediterranean diet. And in contrast, red meat is eaten only occasionally. So before I move on, though, I do want to touch on that last part for a second, because I know when people say eat less red meat, it can be very controversial, especially because we're in the Midwest and agriculture is such a way of life here. When I grew up, my parents have worked at a meatpacking plant for over 30 years. I grew up in the Southwest Kansas. And so I absolutely understand when you hear the words, don't eat red meat, a lot of people tend to freak out. And I just want us to go through this PowerPoint with an open mind. So the one thing I want you to remember is pan versus pills as we go through this. So we rely on pans to make our health better versus instead of pills. So by creating simple and delicious healthy foods. And we have realized that this is truly possible since the pandemic. Many more households have been cooking at home. I think I read somewhere that it's been about a 40% increase in the grocery stores. So we realize like people are able to use their cooking skills, and we want the confidence in the kitchen to soar. So we want to make sure that we continue these cooking habits. One of the things to keep in mind as we talk about the Mediterranean diet is that the typical Italian or Greek dishes that come to mind when we think of the Medway is not always consistent with eating the Mediterranean way. So they are usually high in meat, white flour in meat, white flour in cheese, highly processed foods. There's a lot of dumping of olive oil on processed foods. So for example, if you take a look at the bag of chips, it gives the illusion of being healthy simply by throwing the image of the Mediterranean region and dousing it with olive oil. So this right here is a prime example of why it's important to know exactly what we are actually consuming. So again, it's important to reiterate that this is not a flavor profile. When we talk about the Mediterranean way, it's about the components that we use for making healthy dishes. And the purpose is actually to make real food again at home, and while it can still be simple and satisfying to eat. So as we move on, I want to make sure that we touch on a few of the benefits of the Mediterranean diet. Some of the benefits that include with the Mediterranean way is it decreases the risk of some forms of cancer. It is also more effective than a low-fat diet for weight loss in overweight and obese individuals. Some may say, well, we're eating more nuts and seeds, and don't those have a higher fat content? Well, yes, but those are actually monounsaturated fats that we're eating, so they don't necessarily tend to increase our weight. We have to abandon the notion that we have to be low fat to lose fat, because what we found is when we do low fat products, they're actually found to have more refined sugars or carbs, which we'll talk about later in the PowerPoint. Another benefit that also comes with eating this way is it protects against cognitive decline by protecting the small blood vessels in the brain. There is actually 40% lower risk of developing Alzheimer's when you eat the Mediterranean way. It also improves the eye health. It decreases the risk of macular degeneration, which is the kind that takes away your sight early. And it also decreases the risk of type 2 diabetes. So in one study, the risk of developing type 2 diabetes was reduced by 52% when eating the Med way. So that's a huge, huge factor, especially for people who are pre-diabetic. It can also help manage blood pressure and can reduce cardiovascular disease as much as 30 to 60%. So you can see there's a lot of benefits that go into whenever we take the time to eat a lot more healthier. So if I move on to the next slide. So here we see 7 steps that are specific changes that we can that will help to eat the Med way. So as we talk through and consider the Mediterranean diet, we have to think of terms of taking steps to change the way that we eat. If we can begin to make these changes to establish a healthier diet, then we'll begin to meet our dietary needs. There is no specific order. I don't want you to get caught up on like, this is number 1 and this is number 2. Just pick a change that you want to start on, and we'll begin from there, okay? And Megan, are there any questions so far?
So far, it looks like the only question we have is that they were asking if they would get the recording.
I actually, let's see. I cannot hear you, Megan. Do you want to type actually in the chat box real quick? I'm not sure why it's not hearing you. And I did see in the chat box that it says, do we get a recording? And yes, you will be able to get this recording as soon as it's done. And I will also send out a handout that goes with it and the PowerPoint slides. Okay, so I am going to move on. Okay, so we'll start with the first change. So the first one is change your protein. Changing your protein is arguably the most impactful dietary change that you can make. So we provided this continuum for you. So this continuum was created to give you a visual of what to eat more and what to eat less. So we'll start with, you increase your plant protein. That's the beans, the nuts, and the seeds. And then you can increase the fish intake. So they recommend actually eating fish 2 to 3 times a week, if at all possible. So that's like trying some shrimp with your pasta, or eating a lot more canned tuna, or making some tuna burgers, for example. Then you choose poultry more often, and you can have a moderate amount of dairy and eggs in your diet. They do suggest to limit meat, such as beef, pork, and lamb. So the amount suggested by the Medway is actually eating 2 to 3 times a month, with 4 to 6 ounces per serving. So they suggest eating more fish and more plants for your plate. Adding more vegetables to your meat also saves on your food budget as well. So one of the things I've really learned in society today, we really have this mindset of, we go home, we're ready to make dinner, and the first thing we think of is, I'm going to cook this chicken. What can I cook this chicken with? We have to start to change our mindset of picking our protein second. So think of choosing your vegetables or your sides first, saying, I am going to cook asparagus tonight with some tomato. What protein goes good with that? So starting to change that mindset of ours will really be helpful in this. And again, no one is saying take away red meat. We have to start by changing the amount that we are eating, and that alone can make a difference. Also look for choice words such as loin or round in the name, as these are actually leaner meats as well. And do your best to eliminate or limit processed meat. For example, if you love bacon and you like to use it as a flavoring agent, only use a few pieces at a time, and this will actually be helpful as well. So the second suggestion is to swap your fats. So we have to rethink and rewire the brain a little bit that all fat is bad. So for example, Harvard came out with an article stating polyunsaturated fats were essential fats. That means that they're required for a normal body functions, but our bodies can't make them. So you must go get that food. Polyunsaturated fats are used to build cell membranes and the covering of nerves. So they are needed for blood clotting, muscle movement, and inflammation. So what we know for sure, replacing saturated fat with refined carbohydrates does not decrease the risk of chronic disease. Replacing saturated fat with poly or monounsaturated fat has positive health benefits. And a consumption of a low-fat diet is not associated with a decreased risk of chronic disease, nor is it associated with a lower weight. And there is no safe level of trans fat. So again, just because it says fat-free does not actually mean it is healthy. What a lot of it is that we are doing is we're swapping our fats for refined carbohydrates and refined sugars. And so if you're wondering what monounsaturated or polyunsaturated fats are, we'll talk about it on the next slide. So here's an image of the continuum that would be helpful when distinguishing what to eat more and what to eat less. So unsaturated fats, they're generally found in plants or seafood. It's shown to have health promoting properties as well. So fish high in omega-3 fatty acids include like tuna and trout, sardines, and plant sources of omega-3 fatty acids include flaxseed, oils such as canola, soybean, nuts, and other seeds such as walnuts, butternuts, and chia seeds. So the oil that is recommended actually with the Mediterranean diet is using a lot more of the olive oil. You can use peanut oil, canola. Those are also possibilities, but olive oil seems to be the focus in this Mediterranean diet. So as we move forward on the continuum, you'll see that saturated fats, it's towards the other end. So saturated fats are generally found in animal products, such as meat, butter, cheese, and milk. They're found in dairy and high-fat meats. So it's not been shown to have a lot of health promoting properties. And we should try to limit saturated fat to less than 10% of calories a day. And then we move on to trans fat. So fat that can be found in processed food, fried food, baked goods, convenience and freezer food, everything that we love to eat. It's on the other end of the continuum. And these have shown to be harmful to health. So some tips that you can use to swap your fats are to, for example, dress your salads with olive oil dressing. We recommend using olive or canola for cooking, marinating, dressings that can be a fatty acid. And the healthiest one that they say is actually hazelnut oil, but this is really expensive, and it tends to burn a little bit quicker when cooking. So again, we just recommend using olive oil for this. Or you can replace solid fats like such as butter or mayo and use olive oil instead. So people tend to get really stuck on number one and number two. So please remember, one certain food component can't be blamed for an entire disease progression, and that diet as a whole is what matters. And that's why the Mediterranean really provides you with several steps that you can make to make healthier choices. So the third suggestion is snack on seeds. You may ask which one is better. Actually, just choose a variety. All nuts have some sort of health benefits. Do aim to have about 3 ounces of nuts and seeds per week in order to have portion control and count your calories. So how do you measure that? There are a few tricks that you can use to measure whenever you're eating your nuts and seeds. You can use the rule of 1, 2, 3. So 1 ounce is 23 almonds, or 1/4 of a cup. For you that have young children at home, like a baby jar, you can use 1 jar of baby food. That's a way to measure it. 1 handful. If you have sticky notes, so a 3x3 sticky note, if you measure your nuts out on there, that'll actually give you a right portion size. Or if you have not teenagers, if you have young adults at home, if you have shot glasses or anything, like, you can actually measure those nuts in that measurement as well. So let me check the chat box, because for some reason it doesn't seem that I can hear anybody.
Can you hear me now, Mirna?
There's no. Oh, it seems that you guys are actually getting quite a bit of feedback. So if you please will mute yourselves, there should be a little microphone symbol either at the very bottom corner or at the very top, depending on if you're using a computer, an iPad, or your phone. So try to mute yourself, so that way we make sure that there's not a lot of feedback coming. Okay. So let's move on. So here is the most important component of the Mediterranean way. It's eating more fruits and vegetables. One thing that remains constant, regardless of how much research has changed throughout the years, is that fruits and veggies are a must for a healthy diet. Large data has revealed that as fruit and vegetable intake goes up, weight actually goes down. So if you are an individual that is trying to lose weight, these are a list of produce that actually have proven to show that will help you do that. So berries, apples and pears, broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, green leafy vegetables, non-starchy vegetables such as artichokes, asparagus, cauliflower, celery. Nothing is wrong with corn and potatoes. So many times when we've talked about the Mediterranean diet, I've heard, well, my husband is, he has to have a meat and potato for dinner. That's, there's no way around that. And, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that, but they simply don't have the same protective effect as the ones mentioned. So do your best to incorporate an additional fruit or veggie onto those meals, and maybe try smaller portions of of appropriate serving size for the protein that you're going to serve. So it's just making sure that we're taking into all the considerations that we can. So when we have to make fruits and vegetables craveable, convenient, and cost effective as well. So buy what is on sale, what's in season, go to the farmer's market, buy canned, frozen, dry, whatever is more affordable for yourself and for your family. Make them craveable, add some basil to green beans and zest with a lemon. Make your own dressings. There's so many recipes out there that provide you with guidance on making dressings at home, and also make time to prep. Have it be convenient. For example, if you buy some oranges or apples or anything like that, cut up some slices, have them bagged up and ready to go for their kids to just pick up right after school or for the summertime. And also get your family into help. I think a lot of it comes down to, as well as, the idea of like, I have to do this all by myself, but you don't. If you start to incorporate your family, it's less work for you, and they'll probably be more excited to be able to try things that they have helped prepare. And again, you can try mixing your omelet with veggies, doing a stir fry, adding fruit to your oatmeal. There's a variety of ways that you can incorporate more fruits and veggies into your meal. Okay, so then we move on to suggestion number 6, which is choosing 100% whole grains. So whole grains contain all the parts of the grain, which is the germ, the endosperm, and the bran. Refined grains are missing one or more parts of the grain. Refined grains lack some of the nutrients that are found in their whole grain counterparts. That's why it's really important when we say choose 100% whole grains. So example of that would be whole wheat, popcorn, brown rice, whole oats, whole grain barley, whole grain couscous. So there's a variety of choices that you can choose. So here is also our carbohydrate continuum. Again, we have to rewire the brain that all carbs are bad. So unprocessed whole grains, your options would be like brown rice and steel cut oats. As we move down to the lightly processed, that would be more of your whole wheat pasta and the rolled oats. Foods with whole grains, that would be your wheat bread, whole wheat tortilla. One of the things to keep in mind is that most of the grain that we eat in the US is refined. So almost 40% of the refined grains Americans consume is from yeast bread. So think of your hamburger bun, the pizza crust. We have to remember that a high consumption of refined grains is associated with an increased body fat. So consumption of whole wheat, which is at least 3 servings per day, is associated with a decreased abdominal fat. So a tip that you can take from this is eat grains as grains, not foods made from grain. So an example would be eat more of the brown rice and oatmeal versus breads or crackers. And let's see. And finally, we have number 7, which is rethink your sweets. So sugar is like the new fat. It can absolutely make us sick. Sugar increases the risks of heart disease, diabetes, obesity, tooth decay, and all other health issues mentioned on this slide. Sugar can create a lot of inflammation in the body. So 72% of products have added sugar, and we're not talking about the natural sugar found in fruits. The average sugar consumption per person per year is 152 pounds. That's once you start to think about that, 152 pounds, that is like a healthy young adult. Mostly coming from, and that's mostly coming from sugary drinks. So we get about 15 teaspoons of added sugar in a 20-ounce soda. Sugar has a lot of types of names, but anytime you see a word ending in OSE, you can be certain that that ingredient is a type of sugar. So when you're reading the nutrition label, one thing to look out for is agave nectar, brown sugar, cane sugar, corn sweetener, corn syrup, fructose, anything ending in OSE. So just be aware when purchasing items and take some time to read the nutrition label. What they suggest in the Mediterranean diet is we should be having, for a woman, 6 teaspoons of added sugar recommended per day. For a male, it should be 9 teaspoons of added sugar recommended per day. So if you think about that, if we're actually consuming a lot more than that, and if we have 1 drink of pop and we already have 15 in there, we are going way over our limit. And that is where it is easy to accumulate how much sugar we're actually intaking into our bodies. So to finish out the presentation, I do want to bring attention to the fact that there are other aspects of the Mediterranean diet, such as building a positive support system, being physically active on a daily basis, and limiting highly processed foods. It's okay to remember that if this is all new to you, it is absolutely okay to start in increments. Focus on starting on one goal and then move on to a new one or add 2 more. Another really important factor that I want to stress is it's always be in communication with your physician about any questions and determine together a good health plan for you. For those of you that did walk Kansas this year, we were introduced to the Power 9 developed from the Blue Zones. They touched on the importance of being well-rounded and incorporated healthy habits into all aspects of life. So if you would like additional information on any of those aspects, please just reach out to me or your local county fax agent. I have also listed a couple of resources on this slide that would be extremely helpful. And these are also the slides that were used to create the PowerPoint presentation. And the number one is the resource of Med Instead of Meds. So it's medinsteadofmeds.com. And that should take you to the information as well for if you're looking for additional resources on the Mediterranean diet. So that is all for the PowerPoint presentation. I do want to thank you for joining me this evening. I have provided my contact information, and I will email out a handout in these PowerPoint slides as well as the recording as soon as I can. Please feel free to reach out to me or your local county agent as well. If you need to find out who your local county is, you can go to ksre.com.edu, I believe, and then you should be able to look up where your county office or who your local agent is. And then I will go to see if we have any questions.
Mirna, can you hear me now?
Okay. I'm looking in the chat box to see. And Megan, I'm sorry if I think I see that you're trying to talk to me, and I'm not sure if it's my computer or not. And I will let you guys all know. We had to do some adapting to our presentation today because the internet went out in our office. So I am actually working from home. So it's a little bit of a different setup that we had to do last minute. And Megan said there's a coconut oil question. So let me go up in the chat box and try to find out what the question is. Why do some people think that coconut oil is healthy? And Megan said that she would be happy to take this because this is her area of expertise as well. So yeah, Megan, if you want to take it, you're more than welcome to.
Okay, can everybody else hear me besides Mirna?
Yes.
Yes.
So with the coconut oil thing, it has been a big hype around a lot of areas lately. If you've listened to any media outlets or any celebrities or, Dr. Oz, for instance, they claim that coconut is kind of the cure-all to everything. Well, I'm here to tell you that that is not true. Um, as a matter of fact, about 92% of coconut oil is actually made up of saturated fats because it is one of those tropical oils. A lot of people think it would be unsaturated because those are generally your vegetable oils, your nut oils. But in this case, it is actually a tropical oil. And in that fact, it is mostly saturated fat. So it's not necessarily that cure-all that everybody hypes it up to be. And if people are claiming that, it's generally from a personal testimony. And generally, if that's the case, they've probably made some other lifestyle adjustments besides just, a tablespoon of coconut oil a day. They're probably not telling you the whole story. So with that being said, it's not really all it's cracked up to be. They still highly recommend sticking with those unsaturated fats, such as, like Myrna said, those vegetable oils, those nut oils, olive oil, those kind of things, instead of those saturated fats, which that coconut oil would fall into. Now, if you like the taste of coconut oil, it's not something that you need to just get rid of. But just use it in moderation. Really watch your quantity of it because it is a saturated fat. So hopefully that answered Nancy's question. And I will pass it back to Myrna if you guys have any other questions.
I do not see any in the chat box, and thanks for taking that. I think what was happening is my headphones were not bringing in I could not hear anything that anyone was saying, but I took them out, and it seems to be working a lot better now. Yeah, well, and I had put them in because, like I said, we're working from home. We had to do a quick adjustment because we lost internet at the office, and I was worried that you were going to hear lots of little puggles barking here soon. So, but no, thank you for taking that. And does anybody else have any questions? Because I don't see any more in the chat box. No? Okay, so I want to thank you again for taking the time to listen more about the Mediterranean diet. And as Megan said as well, there's so many components that go into this. You can't just change one thing. It is, making sure that you're being active, making sure that you're eating healthy, and also having that positive support system, because as well as being physically healthy, you have to be emotionally healthy as well. So if you have any questions regarding this, please reach out to your local fax agent, and we would be happy to help you. And then again, I will send out the PowerPoint, a handout in the recording. I'm hopefully we'll do it tomorrow. The reason the PowerPoint didn't go out today is because I needed to get it scanned in, and we didn't have the devices to do that. And so as soon as we get that up and going, we will get that sent out. And then Megan, thank you for taking on that question and watching the chat box for us. And if you don't have any other questions, that is it for tonight. We got you out in time for dinner time. Thank you, everyone.